I still remember walking into that grand ballroom, the air thick with expensive cologne, clinking glasses, and the low hum of power conversations. My heart was pounding, part nerves, part excitement, because this was the moment I thought I might finally be seen as someone who belonged. I had spent months preparing, rehearsing lines, and convincing myself I could hold my own among these titans of industry. But the second I stepped into that circle, I felt it. Every sharp glance, every smirk like a blade against my confidence. Then he appeared, my so-called colleague, the man who had always taken subtle digs at me and called them jokes. He spotted me and smirked, the kind of smirk that promised trouble. Without warning, he launched into his cruel performance, mocking my work in front of everyone, turning my careful presentation into fodder for laughter. I froze. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor, but the humiliation burned hotter than I expected. Their laughter echoed, ricocheting in my head, and for a moment I questioned every decision that had brought me here. Shame, shock, anger, they collided in a confusing storm, leaving me exposed and raw. Yet beneath the sting, a quiet spark ignited. They didn't know who they were messing with. And I decided right then that this wouldn't be the last time I faced him. Once I stepped out of the ballroom, the weight of what had just happened hit me fully, and I let myself lean against the cold marble wall in the quiet hallway. My hands shook slightly as I replayed every word, every mocking glance, every laugh that had seemed to slice through my chest. I couldn't stop asking myself why I had thought I belonged there, why I had believed that years of hard work could shield me from people like him. The humiliation wasn't just public, it was personal, a reminder that I had been underestimated, dismissed, and laughed at for far too long. Memories of smaller betrayals surfaced. Times he had subtly undermined me in meetings, spread rumors behind my back, or claimed credit for work I had poured my soul into. Each recollection tightened the knot in my chest, reminding me how long I had tolerated being overlooked. I thought of the opportunities I had missed because of his interference, the moments of FOMO I carried like invisible chains. Yet in that quiet, painful solitude, a seed of determination took root. I refused to let this define me, refused to be the punchline in his endless game. If anything, this moment had clarified one brutal truth. I had underestimated myself, and they had underestimated me. A few days after that disastrous evening, I found myself at a smaller networking event, trying to recalibrate, blend in, and avoid the spotlight that had humiliated me. I wasn't expecting anything significant, just a chance to gather my thoughts and rebuild some confidence. Then, a quiet voice pulled me aside, a colleague I barely knew but had always seemed observant. "You might want to know," they whispered, eyes darting around as if the walls themselves could eavesdrop. "He isn't as untouchable as he wants everyone to believe. There are inconsistencies." My heart skipped, curiosity battling skepticism. "Inconsistencies?" I pressed, and they leaned closer, revealing hints of shady deals, inflated achievements, and subtle betrayals he had carefully hidden from the public eye. It wasn't much, just fragments of truth, but to me it felt like a crack in the armor I had thought impenetrable. The image of him as flawless, untouchable, and always superior began to wobble in my mind. For the first time since that humiliating night, I sensed an opening, a tiny, dangerous door that might lead to justice, or at least the sweet satisfaction of proving him wrong. A plan began forming in the back of my mind, quiet but relentless, fueled by anger and the thrill of possibility. Days turned into nights, and the sting of that public humiliation refused to fade. Everywhere I looked, I felt his presence lingering, a shadow that stretched into every professional opportunity I tried to grasp. I began questioning myself, wondering if I had been naive to think I could compete in a world that rewarded charm over substance, connections over talent. My confidence, once steady, now wavered like a candle in a gust of wind, flickering against the weight of his relentless social influence. I scrolled through articles, watched others celebrate his successes, and felt a bitter knot of envy tighten in my chest. Not for wealth, not for power, but for the respect and admiration he seemed to command effortlessly. I remembered all the times I had worked tirelessly, pouring late nights into projects, sacrificing weekends, only to be overshadowed, dismissed, or ridiculed. Loneliness gnawed at me, Even friends seemed cautious, unsure how to navigate the subtle toxicity he cast over every room. I wondered if justice was a naive fantasy, a hope for the hopeless, a dream that would leave me disappointed yet again. Each memory of past betrayals and overlooked achievements collided with the present, amplifying my self-doubt. And yet somewhere in that heaviness, a small, defiant ember remained. I refused to surrender completely, even if the path forward was murky and uncertain. The pain of being underestimated and publicly humiliated pressed on me, but it also began to sharpen my awareness, forcing me to notice opportunities he had left exposed, weaknesses he believed no one could exploit. I knew I couldn't rely on raw anger alone. I had to be methodical, deliberate, and patient. Sitting in my small apartment, laptop open and notebooks scattered across the table, I started mapping every interaction, every moment where he had overstepped or shown a hint of arrogance. I made lists, cross-referenced meetings, and dug into public records, watching for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that could give me leverage. Hours blurred together as I pieced together a network of connections, rivalries, and secrets, realizing he had carefully curated a flawless image, but even the most polished facade leaves cracks. I reached out to someone I trusted implicitly, a former colleague who had left the same circle years ago. Over coffee, we spoke in hushed tones, leaning in close, the smell of roasted beans mingling with tension. "He's smart, manipulative, but he's careless where it counts," I said, my voice a mix of frustration and determination. My confidant nodded, eyes sharp. "Then that's where we strike. You've got the facts. Now it's about timing and precision." I felt a spark of relief mixed with adrenaline. Someone saw what I saw. Together, we devised small tests, probed subtly, planted conversational traps, all while keeping my intentions hidden. Dialogue bounced back and forth as ideas collided, strategies refined, and contingencies planned. Every scenario we ran painted a clearer path to undermining him, revealing not only his weaknesses but my own capacity for cunning I hadn't fully acknowledged before. By the time the sun began to rise, I had a blueprint, quiet, calculated, and dangerous. I realized that the humiliation I had suffered wasn't just pain to endure. It was fuel, the catalyst for a plan that could finally level the playing field. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the thrill of possibility coursing through me, a sharp contrast to the despair that had threatened to consume me. It happened almost by accident. I was meeting a friend I hadn't seen in years, someone who had once worked closely with him, but had left the circle quietly, disillusioned. Over lukewarm coffee in a corner cafe, they hesitated, glancing nervously at the door before speaking. "You don't know the half of it," they said, voice low. I leaned in, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" They hesitated, then sighed. "He's not just arrogant. He's been covering things, bad things, deals that cross lines, contracts that were manipulated, promises broken behind closed doors. It's all buried, but I've seen enough to know it's there." My stomach tightened as every piece of the puzzle fell into place. Years of charm and dominance, built on a foundation of lies and unethical shortcuts. My mind raced. The very man who had humiliated me was not invincible, and for the first time, I saw the leverage I had been missing. I asked questions, carefully probing for details, and they spilled fragments, names, events, dates, evidence buried in plain sight. Each revelation added fuel to the fire, shaping a plan that could turn his world upside down. I left that cafe with a sense of urgency, adrenaline mixed with the bitter taste of anticipation. Every step I would take from here mattered. I now held the knowledge that could dismantle his carefully curated image. The humiliation I had endured was no longer just a wound, it was a starting point. And I knew I was finally equipped to strike, methodically, decisively, and without mercy. The night of the next gathering, I walked into the grand hall with a quiet confidence that surprised even me. Gone was the hesitance and trembling from before. I held my head high, aware of every eye that might glance my way. The chandeliers reflected off polished surfaces, but it was my own reflection I noticed most. Someone composed, alert, and no longer invisible. I circulated carefully, engaging in polite conversation, dropping subtle hints of knowledge and influence I had acquired since our last encounter. a whispered anecdote here, a pointed question there, each word chosen to suggest depth and insight, to sow curiosity without revealing too much. I caught his eyes across the room, the same smirk still in place, but now it seemed slightly off balance, uncertain. He hadn't expected this new version of me, someone measured, watchful, and armed with invisible leverage. Every conversation I had, every glance I shared, layered tension into the room, a quiet promise that the balance of power might soon shift. I thought back to the night I had been humiliated, the laughter that had echoed in my ears, and let a subtle smirk cross my face. Then versus now. Weak versus poised. Dismissed versus calculated. The anticipation of what was coming simmered beneath the surface, a silent current that only I fully understood. And in that moment, I realized the real game was only just beginning. I never expected it to happen so soon, but there he was, confidently holding court near the center of the room, oblivious to the storm brewing. A seemingly casual comment from me, a question about a recent deal he had bragged about, caught him off guard. His confident smile faltered for the briefest moment, and I saw it, the tiniest crack in his armor. "Are you sure those numbers add up?" I asked, voice calm but pointed. Whispers rippled through the circle. People leaned in, curiosity replacing casual chatter. He laughed, trying to regain control, but the falter in his tone betrayed him. A colleague I had quietly recruited as an ally leaned over and added a subtle corroboration, nudging the truth into public awareness without anyone realizing it was orchestrated. I felt a thrill I hadn't expected, the first taste of justice, small but potent. The laughter that had once humiliated me now carried a different energy, skepticism and doubt directed at him. He recovered quickly, but the seed was planted, and I could sense the unease creeping into his posture, the careful image he had maintained for years starting to wobble. For the first time since that fateful night, the power dynamic had shifted, however slightly, and I could feel the audience, the people in that room, beginning to question the narrative he had so meticulously crafted. Satisfaction coursed through me, tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Every night, as I lay awake, I replayed every humiliating word, every smirk, every glance of condescension he had thrown my way. The stakes were clear. This wasn't just about pride. It was about proving that I would no longer be dismissed, underestimated, or mocked. I went over the evidence I had collected, the inconsistencies, the secrets, every piece of leverage that could tip the balance. In the quiet of my apartment, I allowed myself to imagine the scene, rehearsing how it would unfold, how the truth could finally come to light. I reflected on the moral justification for what I was about to do. Justice wasn't vengeance, it was accountability. I remembered the long nights, the sacrifices, the moments when I had been invisible while he basked in undeserved praise. And I knew I could no longer afford hesitation. I pictured myself stepping into the next event, not the nervous, trembling version of before, but someone commanding attention, someone prepared, someone ready to seize control. Weakness had defined me, and now strength would. Dismissed had been my role, but I was about to rewrite it entirely. Every heartbeat, every shallow breath, carried tension, anticipation, and the electric thrill of imminent confrontation. I could feel the atmosphere shift in my mind even before it happened, the subtle tightening of the air, the gaze of those who would witness the reversal. I wasn't just preparing to face him. I was preparing to unmask him, to expose the truth, to create a moment that no one could ignore. The psychological weight of what I was about to unleash pressed on me, but it was exhilarating, a sharp contrast to the helplessness I had endured. And as I rehearsed each move, each word, each subtle gesture, I realized the final showdown wasn't merely about him. It was about reclaiming every ounce of dignity, every moment of respect, every piece of power that had been stolen from me. The night arrived, and I entered the room with a calm I had never felt before. Every step was deliberate, measured, every word in my mind already rehearsed. He spotted me immediately, the same smirk playing across his face, confident that his social dominance would go unchallenged. But I was no longer the person who had trembled and shrunk under his gaze. I moved through the crowd, making light conversation, planting subtle references to the insider information I had gathered, hints that suggested I knew more than I let on. Whispers began to circulate. Glances flickered toward him, uncertainty creeping into his posture. Then, with perfect timing, I casually mentioned a key inconsistency, phrasing it as an offhand observation. The effect was instantaneous. The circle of peers he had relied upon for admiration hesitated, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. He stammered, trying to recover, his usual confidence faltering under the weight of growing doubt. I watched him struggle, knowing every smirk and condescending remark he had ever directed at me was now a liability in his carefully curated image. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady, calm, and measured. Each sentence was designed to reveal just enough truth to destabilize him, without giving away the full story I had yet to unleash. By the time I stepped back, the room's energy had changed completely. He was no longer the center of authority, and I could feel the invisible respect and attention turning toward me. The humiliation he had so effortlessly inflicted on me months ago now mirrored itself in him, subtle but undeniable. I had not only reclaimed control of the narrative, but also reasserted my social and professional status. And as I stood there, composed and unwavering, I realized this was more than just a small victory. It was the first step toward the public reckoning that would finally settle the score. The night had been building toward this moment, every whispered hint, every subtle maneuver, leading to the inevitable. I watched from across the room as my best friend, the insider who had provided me with the key information, stepped forward. The chatter dimmed. Eyes followed them as they cleared their throat, commanding attention without a word from me. "I think it's time people knew the truth," they began, voice steady, carrying the weight of undeniable evidence. A hush fell over the elite circle as they detailed every unethical deal, every manipulated contract, every betrayal that had been hidden behind a polished facade. I felt my pulse quicken, the tension in the room like a living thing, stretching from the insider to him. He opened his mouth, stammered, tried to laugh it off, but the details were precise, irrefutable, and publicly humiliating. I noticed the shifting expressions, shock, disbelief, whispers of outrage circulating rapidly. He glanced at me, eyes wide, panic flickering, searching for an ally, a lifeline, anyone to save him from the exposure. I stood calm, composed, every bit the person I had envisioned in my rehearsals. The room had changed. The balance of power was gone, replaced by undeniable truth and moral reckoning. My friend continued, each revelation punctuated with evidence I had helped gather, and I could see the cracks widen, the once flawless image crumbling under its own weight. A few people gasped audibly. Others whispered urgently to one another, reevaluating every past interaction, every accolade he had claimed. I allowed a subtle smile to curve my lips, not of cruelty, but of vindication, inner peace, and the satisfaction of justice served. As the final details were laid bare, he slumped slightly, a man stripped of pretense, his confidence shattered, the audience's judgment weighing visibly upon him. I could feel a profound sense of calm settle over me, the contrast from the trembling, humiliated version of myself months ago undeniable. I had endured mockery, I had navigated isolation, and I had planned meticulously. And now the world saw, not just him, but me, the truth, poised, empowered, and victorious. The insider nodded at me subtly, a silent acknowledgement of our shared triumph. And for the first time in weeks, I breathed freely, knowing the reckoning was complete, the lesson undeniable, and my dignity restored in front of all who had once doubted me. After the room had settled and the murmurs of shock and judgment faded, I found a quiet corner to breathe, to feel the weight of everything that had just unfolded. Relief washed over me, mixed with a quiet pride that I hadn't allowed anger to control me, that I had channeled it into strategy and clarity. I thought back to the months of humiliation, the sleepless nights spent replaying insults, the lingering doubt and loneliness that had gnawed at me relentlessly. Every moment of fear, envy, and frustration now felt like preparation, a crucible that had strengthened me for this exact moment. I reflected on how carefully I had reclaimed control, how I had turned knowledge into leverage, patience into power, and indignation into precise action. The satisfaction wasn't just in his public unraveling, it was in realizing my own resilience, my capacity to endure, observe, and act with purpose. I allowed myself a deep breath and felt catharsis settle in my chest. Empathy for my past self, for every time I had doubted my worth, made the victory sweeter, sharper, and deeply personal. I had been dismissed, overlooked, and mocked, but none of it had broken me. Instead, it had built me into someone stronger, smarter, and more capable than I had ever imagined. And as I looked around, the knowledge that I had restored not only my social standing, but my inner confidence left me feeling empowered, whole, and finally at peace. Sitting alone later that evening, I let the events of the night wash over me, a mixture of triumph and quiet melancholy settling in my chest. Justice had been served, the humiliations reversed, and the truth laid bare for all to see, but the cost lingered in subtle ways. Relationships strained by strategy and secrecy would never fully recover, and I understood that some victories carried shadows of loss. Yet, as I reflected on the journey, I recognized the deeper lessons. Patience, intelligence, and emotional resilience had guided me more than anger ever could. I had faced ridicule, rejection, and doubt, yet navigated it with integrity and careful planning. The thrill of vindication was tempered by awareness that power, when wielded wisely, demanded both cunning and ethical grounding. I smiled faintly at the contrast between the person I had been months ago, timid, humiliated, uncertain, and the version of myself who had stood composed, confident, and strategically in control. The story wasn't just about revenge, it was about growth, self-respect, and the satisfaction of overcoming adversity while staying true to one's principles. As I closed my eyes and let the tension ease, I felt a quiet pride, a sense of closure, and the knowledge that even in a world filled with deception and cruelty, clever strategy and inner strength could prevail. Months later, life had shifted in ways I had only dared imagine. I walked into meetings with a quiet authority, my voice commanding attention without the need to assert dominance aggressively. Colleagues and peers treated me with respect, acknowledging my expertise and judgment in ways that had once seemed impossible. Yet, beneath the surface of this newfound confidence, a faint tension lingered, a reminder that power is never permanent, that vigilance and strategy remain essential. I found satisfaction not only in professional recognition, but in the knowledge that I had reclaimed my dignity and forged a reputation on my own terms. Occasionally, thoughts of him surfaced, a flicker of curiosity about whether he had truly recovered from exposure. But they were distant, muted by the calm assurance of my growth. The experience had shaped me, strengthened me, and left me ready for whatever challenges might arise next. And as I stepped forward, poised and empowered, I felt the quiet thrill of knowing that my story was far from over, and that the lessons I had learned would guide me through every twist yet to come.